Emanating from the wrestling capital of the world, Calgary, Dramatic Pond, Alberta, Canada, and broadcast to the world at www.stormwrestling.com and www.liveaudiowrestling.com. This is Storm Warning, your weekly audio check-in with Extreme Championship Wrestling superstar Lance Storm.
Lance, how you doing in sunny, balmy Calgary, Alberta today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, just basking in the sun all week.
It's like 12 degrees there, right? 12 Celsius.
Yeah, that's the present temperature now. We hit 20 on Monday, which is like 70 for anybody in the States.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, not exactly typical weather, but I'll take it.
You didn't have any snow for Christmas?
No, I think we had one day that it actually snowed, but it melted before the next day. We haven't had like anything in weeks.
It's the calm before the storm.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah, we'll get dumped on in February or something.
Hey, how was your Christmas?
It was really nice and quiet. I got to spend it in my own house, which is always nice.
Oh, good.
And my daughter had fun, which is the best part. So.
Oh, what did she get for Christmas?
Main thing was a big dollhouse that she wanted big time from Santa Claus, and Santa came through, so she was pretty happy.
Was it filled with ECW action figures?
No, she's got the one. I gave her my first Lance Storm I got, and she thought that was pretty cool for about a week.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, it's like Daddy gets thrown in the bottom of the toy box, and out comes Barbie. So I'm jobbing to Barbie already.
No more bumping off the Barbie house there?
Yeah, no kidding.
The Acclaim commercial, you guys recorded the Hardcore Revolution commercial last week in White Plains. How'd that go?
It went pretty good. We started early in the morning. I was there at 9:30 in the morning. They were already set up. A couple of the production guys really didn't, I think, understand what we did.
Right.
They had a neat idea of having a sheet of plexiglass in the ring, about a foot off the mat with a camera underneath it.
Okay.
To get some really cool camera shots, and then they wanted us to dive off the top rope and land on it. And
Land where?
Yeah, exactly. Just land flat on the plexiglass. It was like a 2.5-inch sheet of plexiglass.
Jeez.
And so we argued with them a little bit. It's like, well, we can't exactly do that. And we eventually managed to work a few things out and take a few bumps on it with a little bit of matting, sort of strategically placed off camera shot, but where your knees and elbows had hit.
Right.
I think Dreamer took a couple bumps. I took one. Rob took one on it, and that was about it for taking bumps on the plexiglass.
Who's going to be in it?
Who all was in it? Francine and Dawn Marie were in it for a bit. They got beat up on the plexiglass. Myself, Dreamer, Rob, Jerry was there for a bit. Justin. I think Simon Diamond had some footage taken of him. New Jack.
Oh, yeah.
And then they filmed also, they had a couple cameras there and filmed the show in White Plains, and we'll be splicing footage from that as well. So pretty much anybody could end up in it.
Wow, that's great. I heard the White Plains show was smoking hot.
It was smoking hot and extremely long.
Yeah.
The show started at 7:30 because the band Dope opened the show at 7:30, played for half an hour, and then we started shortly thereafter. And I think it was around midnight that the show actually wrapped up.
Yikes. Was the crowd still hot right to the end?
They were burning out a bit. The last match was Van Dam and Jerry Lynn, and I think Jerry came back. He was kind of disappointed, and I think he was sort of concerned that perhaps the fans are getting tired of Rob and Jerry. But I think more than anything,
kidding?
Well, I think the crowd was just a little burned out.
Oh, okay.
Because Justin and Dreamer had a really good Stairway to Hell ladder match, and they really killed each other.
Yeah.
So they had seen a lot of really good stuff by the time they got Rob and Jerry out there.
Uh-huh. How's Tommy's back after that?
Seems to be pretty good, actually, oddly enough.
How's he still doing it?
I don't know. He's tough. It depends on the day. Some days he's really hurting, and other days he's not.
Mm-hmm.
And even the days that he's hurting, he still seems to, put it out. He's got a bit of that Cactus Jack blood in him, I guess.
Are you surprised that Paul hotshotted the title like that with Tanaka and Awesome?
A little bit. I think it just keeps people on their toes a little bit. And I think it was probably a good PR piece for FMW.
Right.
Because I think, Awesome has such a good match with him. They wanted to, when Tanaka was, we want to put him with Mike, but you don't just want to kill Tanaka off by having him lose 4 or 5 times in a row to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a good political move for FMW, and I don't think it hurts the title because it just adds to the believability that, this is a legitimate thing and it actually, can change hands.
So you don't think it was frivolous at all?
No, I don't think so. I think the fact that it happened so quickly that by the time the one aired, the other had already been switched back.
Well, that was it. Yeah, I mean, the TNN show this past week. I mean, there was already a new champ again.
Yeah, so I don't think it was, if it was just frivolous for the sake of trying to get some ratings or boosting some hype and stuff, it didn't really even have time to hit.
Right.
Because by the time that people found out that the first one happened, it had already gone back to him. So it didn't really accomplish anything on the big hype scale. I think it just gave people a couple really good matches, and it gave the people that night thinking, wow, we really saw something special.
Speaking of the TNN show last week, you guys got to be happy about this. A 1.1 rating on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, I was expecting to get tanked on that one. I really did. I don't know if it's a good statement for our company or a real bad statement for people's lives that they're watching, wrestling on Christmas Eve. But
Doesn't everybody?
Yeah, well, thank you to everybody that did. I actually caught half the show. It was on earlier out here. We get it at 6. So my brother-in-law and I managed to sort of disappear for a half hour before we got called for dinner. So we saw the first half of the show that night. The rest had to catch on tape.
What's up for this week's TNN show?
I really don't know.
You got to have Awesome and Tanaka up there. You got to have the title change, right?
I would imagine you pretty much have to going into the pay-per-view, unless they're going to hold that off till the following week. But I would imagine that's going to air. What else? I'd really like to see the Dreamer Justin match.
Yeah, how long did that go?
That was pretty long. I didn't see it all because there was just so much happening backstage. With me getting a phone call from Callis every 10 minutes saying he's still in Minneapolis.
Well, he had to bring you your gum.
He had to bring me gum. I was getting annoyed. It wasn't there yet. But
for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, check out Lance's commentary this week and you'll get it.
Yeah, it's a funny story. So by the time I realized that I'd missed the first few minutes of it, but it was a decent length match and they did some really inventive, creative spots.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to see that on TV because I think that could really hold some viewers.
I heard the finish for the Awesome Tanaka match was pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard about it, and I couldn't believe it when I did it. It's just a completely new version of the top rope powerbomb that I think people should definitely tune in to see.
Mm-hmm.
Seems pretty dangerous, but Mike's a pretty big, strong guy and seems to have good balance up there. So.
And Tanaka can take just about anything.
I'm beginning to think that, yeah. I've seen him take a good dozen bumps that I wouldn't want to take. So.
His grandchildren's heads are going to be ringing. His grandkids are going to have headaches.
Well, yeah, if he ever finds time enough off to get a girlfriend and get kids. I don't know if he does or not.
Speaking of time off, you guys have a couple weeks to rest before the pay-per-view. Guilty is charged. How are you spending the time?
Trying to get caught up and my house cleaned up and organized after Christmas is a big part. Hoping to hit the gym really hard and regular and hit the tanning bed, so, there's always the big ego boost. You got to look good on pay-per-view, so...
Mm-hmm.
So, hitting the gym hard, which is nice, because the week before Christmas, I just didn't get to the gym at all. I ended up having about 10 days off from the gym, because I was just too busy trying to get shopping done and organized and everything else. So, visit a couple friends here in town that I seem to never get a chance to visit with, because they seem to work during the week, and I'm gone on weekends. So, I'll hook up with a few buddies on the weekend and hit the gym.
Cool. I got a quote here from Foley's book. I'm making my way through it slowly but surely. Mick Foley talking about Extreme Championship Wrestling. The company today stays afloat due to a few loyal wrestlers and the creativity of Paul Heyman. Can I get some comments on that quote?
It's half accurate, I would say. I think it also depends on when he actually made the statement and, when was the last time he actually, was in contact with ECW. I think when we first started, that was certainly the case. That, it had a few guys that were willing to kill themselves, and it had great creativity by Paul. I think Paul's creativity is probably our strongest suit still.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now that we've gone with the pay-per-view events, and we've got the national TV market and stuff. I think it's so much more than that now. I think we are a legitimate, viable company that regardless of just a couple guys and Paul's creativity, I think we're more than that now.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got at least half a dozen to 8 guys that could definitely work and headline any company right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here because we like being in ECW, and you can make a good living here now too. It's not just that we're here because we're loyal. We're here because this is a good place to make a living now.
Right. We were just speaking about Mick Foley. Who is your favorite Mick Foley character now that he's winding his career down?
It's hard to say because Mick really wasn't the kind of wrestler that I really enjoyed.
Right.
I was always more of a wrestler kind, not just a guy that because when he first started, he was basically a shock guy, that shocked you with a lot of big bumps. He's progressed, far past that now and in the last few years, but probably Cactus Jack, just because that was the first one that I saw.
Right.
And usually the first thing you see somebody as is what you recognize them as. Like anytime I see him, I always say it's a Cactus match, not a Mankind match.
It's like your favorite James Bond. It's whoever you see first, that's your favorite.
Yeah, exactly. If Sean Connery was the first one you saw, he's James Bond. That's just the way it is. So I would have to say Cactus would be my favorite.
Speaking of gimmicks, would you ever change yours, or do you always want to be Lance Storm?
I don't know if I'd even consider myself actually even having a gimmick.
Right.
The name I've hated since the first day I had it.
Oh, really?
Oddly enough, it was one of those cases where it was Jericho, myself, and I think 2 other people driving to our first show, going, "Well, you need a name. What are you going to use?" And that was the best we could come up with before we got to the building. I don't know. To me, it just sort of sounds like a fake name. Like when you come up with a name that's good, like Jericho, it's like people just call him Jericho.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a good name. It's like people just call me Lance. That's my name. It always was my name. But the Storm thing is just sort of, I need a last name to put on the bill, so that's what I got to use.
But I mean, the Calgary dramatic pause, Alberta, Canada thing, that's working.
Yeah, it's working. I think, largely in part because it's, something I actually do believe in.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly exaggerated this to a certain extent for TV, but it's something I honestly believe in, and I think, gimmicks that are a shoot or at least a half a shoot are what work the best. I would certainly like to keep with that, but it's one of those things where if I went to WCW, I couldn't use it.
Right.
Because, there's Bret. Although by the time I.
Oh, I don't know. That could set up a nice money program there.
It could, but I would imagine by the time, assuming that I ever ended up there, that he'd probably be on his way out at that point anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough of a difference between, his peak and my peak that we're probably not going to be in a major program against each other.
Right.
In New York, you could certainly still use that gimmick because there's not a whole lot of other people that are using the Calgary bill, especially now that they're billing Jericho from Winnipeg, which I think is actually just a rib on Callis.
That's what Don said to me once, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. He
was
Winnipeg's #1 son, up until they decided to bill Chris from there. So now he's just like, secondhand news.
Don told me once that was Vince McMahon's final joke at him, or final, sort of poke at him.
Wouldn't surprise me. I'd like to think Vince has far better things to do with his time, but, if he enjoys a good jab and a bit of a rib, I think that one's a hilarious one.
Let's talk a little bit about doing jobs. Barry Saturn was on the Live Body Wrestling program on the weekend and said this: if you don't do a job, then you're a mark because you believe it's all real. What do you think of that?
Politically correct Barry Saturn strikes again.
God bless him.
There's probably some truth to that. If you absolutely refuse, no ifs, ands, or buts, I don't think I should ever do one.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly, I guess some degree of being a mark there, but I think we all are marks to a certain extent. And I think a lot of guys overrate, how much damage doing a job can do, and they're afraid that it'll hurt their character, it'll hurt their, their income value in the future. Not necessarily just that they're a mark and believe in themselves. They're just perhaps paranoid that, doing a job will hurt their value.
Right.
Where I really don't think, doing a job or even a few jobs hurts anybody.
Well, look at Jerry Lynn.
Yeah, Jerry Lynn's a prime example, and look at Jericho. It's like he did a clean job to China on pay-per-view, and he's still getting big props. His shirt's still like #2 or #3 seller that they have. Doing a job to Tammy at the ECW arena made me as a heel.
Mm-hmm.
There's difference between being a jobber and doing a job, and I think sometimes people get them confused.
Is that a big problem in ECW?
Not really. I think there's a few guys that people think won't do jobs. Like I think a lot of people figure Rob just won't do a job, but I don't think it's him necessarily as much as Paul just sees that his character and he doesn't want him doing them.
Right.
I think it's more Paul protecting people more so than them. Because I have heard a few fans, somebody's like, God, won't Rob do a job? And it's like, well, it's not Rob's call. I think Rob would be more than happy to do one if the time was right when it is right.
Mm-hmm.
It's Paul who's the guy that has to make that call. I don't think there's too many guys that outright won't do one. Look at Sandman. He loses every week and he's still over.
Huge too, yeah.
That's a sign of a guy who truly is over or understands. He knows how to get himself over whether he's losing or not, which is to his credit.
Right. Hey, you're gonna get this asked to you probably a million times, and I'm sure I'm not the first one. But Lance, it's the end of the millennium. Who's the best wrestler of all time?
Boy, of all time. It's such a hard thing because it matters so much for your tastes.
Mm-hmm.
I would certainly put a few people in there. I would say Ric Flair. You certainly have to put in top contention, just because he's done it for so long and with so many people.
Right.
You look at a Shawn Michaels who you can argue is the best performer, but he really didn't do it over a long enough period of time to be in the class of Ric Flair. I don't think.
Right.
He was only like the top guy for a couple of years, and then his back ended up giving out on him. Ric Flair certainly, I think Dynamite as far as skill is certainly up there. But I would probably, if I had to pick somebody, probably go with Flair.
Right.
There might be guys that were, before Flair that I didn't get an opportunity to see. Bruno was champ for how many years, but I never really actually saw Bruno ever work, so I couldn't, rate guys that are, of that generation.
Yeah, it's tough going from one generation to another because, the wrestling has gotten so much, the athletes have gotten better,
Yeah,
the
and
moves
it's
are more
just
sophisticated.
the sport has gone such a different route now that it's so hard. And when it's a worked sport, it's like, do you go by who's the best matches, who drew the most money, who was pushed? There's just so many variables.
Right. What was the best match you ever saw?
Boy, one that always stands out in my mind, and I've watched it several times and loved it, was Bret and Owen for Mania 10.
Yeah.
A
nice finish too.
Yeah, they did so much where it's like you really believed each one was trying. When they kept going for sharpshooters, and it's like they'd get out of it and it wouldn't even be a smooth escape. It'd be like just fighting and falling over.
Mm-hmm.
That just, I thought, made it so believable.
That was like Bret and Benoit in Kansas City.
Yeah, see, I didn't see that one.
So when they went for the sharpshooter finishes and stuff like that, it looked the same way. It looked like a fight. It looked really cool.
Yeah, like that night they had that great ladder match too, and that night you thought, wow, that ladder match was sensational. But you could go back and you could watch the Bret and Owen over and over again, and it still stayed as good.
Right.
Where I found with the ladder match, once the original hype of just, oh my God, look at these bumps, wore off,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't have the staying power that Bret and Owen did.
You're not in so much to gimmick matches, huh?
No, I think they have their place, but I think a gimmick match, there's so much hype into the gimmick like a cage that there's excitement that night watching it, but to watch it over and over again, I find gimmick matches lose their interest.
Right.
They're really great the first night out because you can get away with doing not as much because there's so much interest in the gimmick. But once the hype in the crowd from that night is lost, it's you realize that you didn't necessarily actually do all that much.
Mm-hmm.
Where just a good top-notch wrestling match really stands out in your head.
You think we're ever going to get back to that?
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. I think every time they, when Vince went really big into gimmicks there for a while, where everybody had a different occupation and a gimmick, you had the boss man and everything else.
Yeah.
That served its purpose, and then it ran its course, and people got fed up, and they had to go back to wrestling.
Yeah, and it was Shawn and Bret, and
yeah, and then now they're going just completely nutso with catchphrases and skits and everything else, and that'll eventually run its course, and people will get sick of it, and then they'll have to go back to wrestling, and I think that'll always be the mainstay.
That's good points. Let's get to some emails. This one comes in from Andrew Bryce. Hi, Lance. I'm a Japanese wrestling fan, and I was wondering, why do you think that in Japan, wrestlers are treated like sportsmen and wrestling treated like a legit sport, while in the USA, wrestling is seen as a joke? I know the WWF and WCW is more like a circus than actual wrestling, and that is why I don't watch them unless the likes of Benoit, Finlay, Hart, Guerrero, and Malenko are wrestling. Why do you think that in ECW the crowd pops for wrestling just like a Japanese crowd, but in the WWF and WCW the crowd would rather see the no-talent Rock shout his mouth off down a microphone?
Wow, no talent, that's pretty stiff. I think a lot of the appeal to Japan and why it has so much credibility is the promoters themselves. Like, I'll speak more of All Japan and New Japan, not the smaller companies, but they really protect it. Mm-hmm. Like, the younger guys pay their dues, and they really have to work their way up, and fans see them get their butts kicked for year after year and earn their spot, and so they're respected more. And they tend to push the athletes and the guys that can get it done more so than just, hey, this guy has a great catchphrase, let's push him. Mm-hmm. And I think the press coverage in Japan is so good and so credible. Like, they have weekly publications that are up to date. There's pictures that are, phenomenal. They've got the best photographers in the world. Mm-hmm. And they report it every show as being important, not just, if it's not on TV, it doesn't count. So that when the press, the media, and the promotion treats the sport with credibility, it comes across that way and fans believe it. Where here in the States, you pick up a Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and the date on it is, 3 months from now. The coverage is from 7 months ago.
Right.
Stories are obviously just some guy sitting in the basement of the offices making it up. Mm-hmm. And it's like they don't treat it with respect, and then the sport comes off looking like it doesn't deserve it. And it doesn't help when you take a guy who obviously doesn't have the talent and push him through the roof regardless. You take a guy like Ultimate Warrior and just say, okay, he's got a great body and some charisma, let's just, push him to the moon. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Even though, other than maybe a couple matches with Rick Rude, he never had a good match in his life.
Right.
And so I think a lot of it is, the way the sport is treated here and presented to the fans, and it's just the way they see it.
The ECW crowd is educated like a Japanese audience. Would you agree with that?
For the most part, I think so, yeah. And a lot of it is, the guys in ECW really have to pay their dues. Most of the guys, when they come in, do jobs.
Right.
And they feel like they've earned their spot. And, when you first come in the first night in ECW, boy, the fans treat you like you're garbage because they figure they deserve the spot more than you do, and you really have to earn it. Mm-hmm. So once you do earn it, they pop for you and they respect you. And, also, we give them a pretty high work rate, so they deserve to, give us a little bit of respect.
Yeah, I mean, when the Japanese guys are out there, they still get the "Where's my egg roll" chance, but then they get standing ovations at the end of the match.
Yeah, the fans enjoy, ribbing us and, calling people, you fat this and, you screwed up and everything else. But, the bottom line is at the end of the night, if you worked your butt off, we'll applaud for you.
Mm-hmm.
And, I appreciate that, and I think most of the guys do appreciate that, and that's why we work hard.
This email comes in from Noah Dodd of Portsmouth, Virginia. Question for Calgary's effing show, ripping off RVD here. Hey Lance, after watching ECW for over a little more than a year now, I've been wondering, who decides what theme music you'll come out to? Another question I also have for you is, what moves would you be highly cautious of in a match? Are moves like the Dragon Suplex as dangerous as they look?
With music, it's sort of half and half. I know a lot of guys pick their own because there's certain stuff they like. Mine was actually picked for me. The new CD, when it came out, the ECW CD, I think Paul wanted one of the songs on it to be for me, so he had a Queen show. I had Randy, the sound guy, play it, and he asked me what I thought about it. He said he wanted to use it, and I, gave him the okay. Said, yeah, I like the tune, let's do it. So a lot of times it's picked for you, and other times you get to pick it yourself. As for moves to be cautious about, I think you need to be cautious about absolutely every move you do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second you don't is when you do get hurt. You can get hurt just doing an arm drag if you do it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And especially from a protecting standpoint, it's like a lot of times it's not only does the guy giving it have to be careful, but you have to be careful in protecting yourself taking stuff too. The Dragon Suplex I've never actually taken. There's only a couple guys that I think I would trust enough to do it because it is a dangerous move.
Mm-hmm. Who would you trust?
I trust Benoit because he's done it a million times.
Right.
A lot of Japanese guys I would probably trust because they've got a really good bridge. But it would have to be somebody that I've seen do it before.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of moves, pile drivers and stuff like that, you really do have to be cautious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially to understand them yourself, because there's a lot of ways you can protect yourself. And I've talked to guys in the back about moves and stuff, and they don't even realize that there's ways they can protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think everything you need to be cautious about, because it's a dangerous sport.
This one comes in from Nick Aragon of San Francisco, California. Hey, here's one I can answer. Lance, when is your site going to finish the merchandise section? Early in the new year.
There we go. That one's done, eh?
What is your personal opinion of Paul Heyman? He seems to be a power freak when it comes to ECW. Does he use or abuse his position in ECW?
I don't know if you'd say he's a power freak as much as he is just very, very passionate about this company. It's something that he's worked so hard to make that he believes so much in it that he does come across as a control freak. I know when it comes time to TV and producing the TV shows, he's very, very adamant and a very big stickler for detail, which I think comes across in good product. If you aren't very passionate or very control oriented, things will get out of your hands and won't get done the way you want them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he abuses his power at all. I think he's very open to suggestions, criticisms and everything else. He takes criticism, he takes advice and listens to it. He doesn't always necessarily heed it, but he listens. I wouldn't say he's a power freak, but he's certainly very much control oriented.
Is he the most talented promoter you've ever worked for?
Boy, that's a tough one. I think he's probably the most talented booker I've worked for.
Mm-hmm.
The promoter name is sort of always it's a term that what do you consider the promoter? The guy that books and promotes the towns, the guy that hires talent, fires talent, books angles. He's probably the most talented booker anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who would be the best promoter. Maybe he is. I don't know. Tenru treated me really good and ran some good shows.
Yeah, you've always loved Tenru.
I think anyone that's worked for him loved him.
Mm-hmm.
I know Jericho, raves about him, thinks he was just a real class act. He treated me really well, ran a good show, took care of his foreigners.
49 years old, and they put the IWGP strap on him. He's got to be a tough man.
Oh, he's a tough guy. I remember one night the Yakuza were in the front row in Japan, and they have the Japanese are very big on proving that wrestling isn't a bunch of bunk and you're a tough guy if you're in it.
Right.
And he wailed off and headbutted a guy and caught himself purposely across the eyelid in the guy's head and split his own eye open. Hard weighed himself above the eyebrow, and his whole eyelid and eyebrow was hanging over his eye and bleeding down. It was something he did intentional to prove to the Yakuza he was tough.
Oh, did you ever have any run-ins with the Yakuza while you were there in Japan?
No, I mind my P's and Q's very well, and I wasn't one to go out much. So.
How prominent are they in the wrestling community? There's a book out now called Tokyo Underground, which talks about the Yakuza and their involvement in wrestling with guys like Rikita Zan, and even when Lou Thez was over there as well.
Yeah, like there's certain nights that the Japanese guys will give you the office and say look, this side of the ring or or the Yakuza you don't go brawl over near there, stay away from them and everything else. So there's certain nights that you can tell that they're there, And, you know, everybody certainly gives them their respect and minds their own business when they're around, so they're certainly prominent.
Interesting, interesting. Here, this one comes in from Chris. Hello, Lance. I'm a new viewer to ECW. I've been watching it since it started on TNN. Before that, I could only read what other people said about it in the papers. I really like the ECW now. The action is awesome. I can't believe some of the spots that are done. The other two would dare to do half of the things that you do and the other wrestlers in ECW do. You are by far my favorite wrestler in ECW, and I love the way you say you come from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I have a couple quick questions if you get a chance to answer them. Number one, what was the most embarrassing thing that has happened to you during one of your matches? And two, what is the best way to go about getting autographed photos from some of the wrestlers in ECW like yourself and the Impact players?
Okay, the embarrassing thing actually when I come in, I sat there and I thought and I couldn't come up with anything, you know, other than just blowing a spot really bad, which everybody's done.
Right.
And then I remember the time, I think it was either 94 or 95, I was in Winnipeg working for Tony Condello. Don Callis was booking. And Rick Martel was doing some angles over there with Callis and did a lot of TV against Don Callis. And they were, you know, headlining most of their shows were Martel versus Callis.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a tour booked, and Martel wasn't on it. They had never tried to book him on it. And Tony Condello, being, you know, your basic meat and potatoes, really bad indie promoter, had all his posters done the same, and Martel was on all the posters.
Mm-hmm.
And Martel wasn't in, and he never mentioned that Martel wasn't going to be in. I was in working the main event with Callis, and everybody in the building assumed Martel was. So Callis went to the ring for the main event, and they hit my music, and I came through the curtain. And the second I came through the curtain, the guy right on the side just looked at me and said, "Who the F are you?" And it's like my face just dropped, and it's like, oh boy, this is going to be a long night.
Oh, no.
Because I had maybe been on TV a couple times in Winnipeg, probably
Uh-huh.
not in over a year or two at that point, and everyone was expecting Martel, and there wasn't a person in the building that wanted to see me.
Oh, great.
And that was probably the most embarrassing. That was rough. Callis and I had a good joke about that afterwards.
Lance, we got to get out. We're out of time. But before we do, you got New Year's plans?
Actually, no. Staying at home probably. It's just safer and easier.
Nice. Enjoy your time off. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Fans, if you want Lance to answer your questions on this show, email us at lancestormathome.com. And don't forget to check back often at www.stormwrestling.com, the official website of Lance Storm for news, updates, and commentary. Retransmission in whole or in part of this broadcast without the expressed written consent of Lance Storm and live audio wrestling is strictly prohibited.